19 years old, standing in the biting autumn wind with nothing but a frayed woolen shawl and exactly $5 to her name, Clara Vance was a soul completely cast out by her treacherous stepfather, Thaddeus Finch, who had seized her late mother's homestead through forged ledgers and sheer malice. With those remaining $5, she did what the cynical townspeople of Windrow Valley called an act of pure, desperate madness. She purchased the deed to a skeletal, ruined windmill on the northern ridge at a county tax auction, a decaying monument of rotted timber and rusted iron that the world had long since abandoned to the elements. To the merchants and farmers who watched her trudge up that windswept hill, she was merely a foolish girl chasing a ghost, a broken child seeking shelter in a wreck that would surely collapse under the first winter blizzard. Yet, high within the splintered, dust-choked rafters of that forgotten structure lay a sealed legacy, a hidden secret that would not only rewrite the trajectory of her own stolen life, but would breathe miraculous restoration into the parched, dying lands of the entire valley below. Settle in, and let us tell you the story of Clara Vance. If you are watching from a place that feels forgotten, or if you have ever had to rebuild your life from the dust, tell us your journey in the comments below. To understand the quiet steel that resided within the heart of Clara Vance, we must look back to the years before the shadows lengthened over her family's name, to a time when the high prairies of Wyoming were still a canvas of untamed green and gold. Born in the final decades of the 19th century, Clara was the daughter of Thomas Vance, a master millwright and a man whose hands possessed the rare magic of turning rough-hewn oak and forged iron into living, breathing mechanisms that served the earth. Thomas did not merely build structures, he taught his daughter to listen to them, instructing her in the language of weight and balance, of leverage, and the invisible currents of the wind that swept across the great American frontier. From the time she could walk, Clara accompanied her father into the bellies of timber-framed mills, her small fingers learning the texture of linseed oil, the grain of seasoned ash, and the precise alignment of interlocking wooden cogs that could grind grain or pump water from the deepest caverns of the earth. She learned that nothing was truly broken if its foundation remained true, and that the most profound strength was often found in the things that stood silent against the storm. Her mother, Martha, provided the emotional anchor to this practical education, instilling in Clara a quiet, unshakable dignity and an unwavering belief that kindness was a form of courage, never to be mistaken for weakness. Together, in their modest cabin surrounded by wild sage and the endless horizon, they formed a world built on honest labor and deep mutual devotion. Clara grew up not as a fragile creature of the parlor, but as a resourceful young woman who could read the weather in the flight of the birds and repair a slipped belt on a thresher before the morning sun had fully cleared the eastern peaks. These early years were filled with the sweet aroma of wood smoke, the steady rhythm of her father's mallet, and her mother's soft evening songs, a tapestry of warmth and security that Clara believed would shield her forever. She was taught to respect the land, to understand that the frontier took much, but gave back in abundance to those who possessed the patience to cultivate its hidden gifts. It was a childhood of profound simplicity and profound wealth, measured not in gold coins but in the depth of character passed down through generations of frontier resilience. But the frontier is as indifferent as it is vast, and the bright days of Clara's youth were destined to be swallowed by a sudden, catastrophic darkness that tested every fiber of her being. The ruin began during the bitter winter of her 18th year, when a relentless outbreak of mountain fever swept through the valley, claiming her father within a matter of days, and leaving Clara and her mother heartbroken and utterly vulnerable. In her overwhelming grief and desperation to save the homestead from mounting debts, Martha made the tragic mistake of trusting Thaddeus Finch, a smooth-tongued land speculator who promised security but brought only a calculating ruin. Within months of their hasty marriage, Martha's health failed her as well, her spirit broken by the loss of her first husband, leaving Clara completely alone in the world, with a stepfather whose true, predatory nature was quickly revealed. No sooner had the earth settled over Martha's grave than Thaddeus produced a series of questionable legal documents, claiming full ownership of the Vance homestead and declaring Clara an unwelcome squatter on the land her father had cleared with his own bleeding hands. On the morning of her 19th birthday, under a sky the color of tarnished pewter, Thaddeus threw her meager belongings into the dirt and ordered her off the property, forbidding her from taking anything but the clothes on her back and the $5 silver her mother had hidden in an old tin box. The betrayal was absolute, a systemic stripping away of her identity, her home, and her future, leaving her to walk the long, dusty road toward Windrow Valley with a heart heavy with sorrow, but a mind that refused to break. As she walked, the memory of her father's voice echoed in her mind, reminding her that a storm could strip the leaves from a tree, but could not dislodge roots that ran deep into the bedrock. The town of Windrow Valley offered no warm embrace. It was a community hardened by a prolonged, devastating drought that had turned the surrounding farms into dust bowls and left the local economy at the mercy of wealthy, unscrupulous men who profited off the misery of others. Clara found herself an outcast among outcasts, a penniless orphan in a dying town, looking at a world that seemed to have no place for her resilience or her dreams. It was during the monthly county tax auction, held on the steps of the dilapidated courthouse, where desperate farmers watched their livelihoods sold to the highest bidder, that Clara saw her destiny disguised as a hopeless wreck. The town crier, a man with a voice like grinding stones, offered up the deed to the old Miller's Ridge property, a barren acre of land on the highest bluffs, containing nothing but a ruined, non-functioning windmill built 30 years prior and long since abandoned. The local farmers scoffed at the offering, for the windmill's sails were gone, its timber siding was rotted away to a skeletal frame, and it was widely known that no water had flown from its well in over a decade. Seeing an opportunity for a cruel joke, the town's wealthiest land baron, Julian Sterling, a man who had been systematically buying up dry farms for pennies, bade $1, mocking the property as a fitting grave for the town's forgotten history. Prompted by an instinct she could not explain but chose to trust entirely, Clara stepped forward from the back of the crowd, her voice clear and resonant as she offered her entire life savings, $5 silver. The crowd erupted into mocking laughter, and Sterling conceded with a dismissive wave of his hand, amused by the sight of a destitute girl spending her last coins on a pile of worthless timber. When the gavel fell, Clara held the deed to the ruined windmill, possessing nothing else but the determination to survive and the knowledge her father had left her. She climbed the steep, rocky path to the ridge that very afternoon, the wind howling through the open frame of the mill like a chorus of welcoming ghosts, its massive oak mainshaft groaning under the pressure of the gale. The structure was in a deplorable state. The lower floor was filled with decades of debris, wild weeds had pierced through the floorboards, and the roof was partially collapsed, exposing the intricate internal machinery to the harsh Wyoming weather. Yet, as Clara stood in the center of the ruin, looking up at the massive wooden gears that her father had taught her to understand, she felt a profound sense of peace, realizing that this forgotten giant was just like her, abandoned, misunderstood, but possessing an inherent purpose waiting to be awakened. Her first days on the ridge were a testament to human endurance, as she cleared the debris by hand, using discarded branches to sweep the floor and creating a small, sheltered corner beneath the sturdiest beams where she could sleep on a bed of dry prairie grass. She subsisted on wild berries and the kindness of a sympathetic blacksmith's widow who gave her scraps of dried beef, spending every daylight hour inspecting the wooden cogs, cleaning the rust from the iron fittings with sand and grease, and assessing the structural integrity of the mill. It was during the first true freeze of the season, while she was climbing into the highest tier of the structure to secure a loose tie beam against the mounting northern gales, that her hand brushed against something foreign, hidden deep within the shadow of the main rafter. Reaching into a cavity where the massive roof ring met the support timbers, a space completely invisible from the floor below, her fingers encountered the cold, solid surface of an old iron-bound cedar lockbox, heavily coated in decades of dust and grease. With great care, balance, and a racing heart, she maneuvered the heavy box out of its hiding place, carrying it down the perilous ladder to her small living area, where the afternoon sun filtered through the gaps in the wall. The box had no key, but using a rusted blacksmith's file she had found in the dirt, Clara patiently worked at the ancient lock until the internal mechanism clicked open, revealing a treasure that had nothing to do with common gold, but everything to do with the soul of the valley. Inside, wrapped in oilskin to protect them from the damp, lay the detailed journals and engineering blueprints of the mill's original builder, Ephraim Miller, alongside a series of unrecorded land deeds and a hidden ledger that dated back to the founding of Windrow Valley. As Clara turned the yellowed pages of the journal, her eyes widened as she realized she was holding the key to a monumental secret. Ephraim Miller had not abandoned the mill because the water dried up, but because he had discovered something that threatened the greedy ambitions of the town's founding elite. The deeper Clara delved into the contents of the cedar box, the more the dark history of Windrow Valley began to unravel before her, revealing a conspiracy of silence that had kept the community in poverty for a generation. Ephraim Miller's journals detailed his discovery of a massive subterranean aquifer, an underground river flowing directly beneath the northern ridge, which he had successfully tapped using a revolutionary deep well pumping mechanism of his own design. However, the ledger revealed that Julian Sterling's father, in collusion with Thaddeus Finch's family, had discovered that this aquifer was the primary water source for the entire region, and that by controlling or capping it, they could create an artificial drought, forcing independent farmers off their lands so they could purchase the territory for a fraction of its value. Miller had refused to participate in their scheme to starve the valley, and before he could register the official deeds and maps that proved the water's true location, his mill was sabotaged. His family was driven away under the threat of violence, and the true wellhead was secretly capped and hidden beneath a massive stone seal. The box contained the exact mathematical calculations and mechanical drawings needed to reconstruct the specialized pump, as well as the original, legally binding land grants that proved the aquifer was public property, meant to be shared equally by all residents of the valley. Clara realized with a shuddering breath that the drought paralyzing the town was not merely an act of nature, but a calculated crime perpetuated by Julian Sterling, who was currently using his wealth to choke the life out of the remaining homesteads. The true wealth in the Rafters was the truth itself, accompanied by a small velvet pouch containing 50 historic Silver Eagle coins, left behind by Miller to fund the reconstruction of the pump, should a righteous soul ever find his legacy. Clara sat in the dimming light of the windmill, looking out over the dark, parched valley below, knowing that she held the power to overthrow the tyrants who had destroyed her family and ruined her neighbors, but also knowing that the path ahead was fraught with extreme danger. The silence of the ridge was broken a week later when Julian Sterling himself rode up the hill, flanked by 2 hired deputies, his face contorted in a mixture of amusement and growing suspicion as he saw that Clara had actually repaired the lower doors and cleared the surrounding land. He offered her $20 silver to buy back the deed, claiming he wanted the hill for a cattle lookout, but his eyes darted nervously toward the upper structure of the mill, betraying a deep-seated fear that she might discover what lay beneath the floorboards. Clara stood her ground, her posture dignified and her voice steady as she politely declined his offer, stating that the ruined windmill was now her home and she had no intention of parting with it for any price. Sterling's demeanor instantly shifted from patronizing arrogance to cold, venomous hostility, and he threatened her with forced eviction, claiming the structure was a public hazard that the town council would soon vote to demolish. Over the next fortnight, the pressure intensified. The local mercantile suddenly refused to sell Clara grain or supplies. Rumors were spread through the town that she was a madwoman practicing witchcraft on the hill, and one dark night, a mysterious fire was set at the base of the mill, which Clara only managed to extinguish by smothering the flames with dirt and her own woolen shawl. Realizing that time was running out and that Sterling would soon resort to outright violence to reclaim the ridge, Clara knew she could no longer fight this battle in isolation. She descended into the valley under the cover of darkness, visiting the homes of the most desperate, broke-backed farmers, men who had known her father and respected his memory, and showed them the blueprints and the legal deeds from Ephraim Miller's box. Seeing the proof of the artificial drought and the existence of the hidden water, a secret society of desperate but honorable men formed around Clara, agreeing to help her repair the windmill's internal mechanism in absolute secrecy during the dead of night. For 3 weeks, working by the dim light of shielded lanterns, Clara and the farmers performed a miracle of frontier engineering, using her father's teachings and Miller's precise blueprints to forge new iron teeth for the gears and construct the massive deep well pump. Clara herself climbed into the highest rafters night after night, adjusting the heavy oak brake wheel and installing new canvas sails she had stitched together from discarded grain sacks, her hands blistered and bleeding, but her spirit burning with an unquenchable fire. The climax of their labor came on the eve of the winter solstice, just as Julian Sterling arrived at the ridge with a legal demolition order and a crew of men carrying axes and torches to tear the mill down by force. A large crowd of townspeople had gathered at the base of the hill to witness the confrontation, believing they were about to see the final destruction of a foolish girl's dream, but instead they witnessed the birth of a revolution. As Sterling ordered his men to advance, Clara stood at the entrance of the mill, signaling the farmers hidden within the structure to release the great iron brake wheel, allowing the fierce winter gale to catch the newly installed canvas sails for the first time in 30 years. The massive wooden gears groaned, then turned with a majestic, accelerating roar, and as the revolutionary pump engaged deep within the earth, the ancient stone seal was shattered, and a tremendous torrent of crystal-clear, pressurized water erupted from the wellhead, cascading down the hill in a spectacular, life-giving river. The sight of the roaring water, pristine and abundant, struck the townspeople like a divine revelation, and as Clara stepped forward to hand the historic land deeds and evidence of fraud to the county circuit judge, who happened to be in the crowd, a collective cheer shook the valley. Julian Sterling's empire of deceit crumbled in an instant. Faced with the undeniable proof of his family's crimes and the wrath of an energized, newly hydrated community, he was arrested on charges of land fraud and resource theft, his wealth seized to pay restitution to the families he had impoverished. Thaddeus Finch, hearing of the downfall of his co-conspirator and fearing the legal reckoning that would surely follow regarding the Vance homestead, fled the territory under the cover of night, leaving behind the stolen property, which was promptly restored to its rightful heir, Clara Vance. But Clara did not return to live in isolation on her family's old farm. Instead, she deeded the homestead to a young, landless family from the valley, choosing to make her permanent home on Miller's Ridge, where the windmill stood as a proud, functioning monument to public prosperity. The water from the ridge revived the dying farms, turning Windrow Valley once more into a land of abundance, and the community established a cooperative trust, ensuring that the resource would remain free and protected for all generations to come. Clara Vance, who had been cast out as a penniless orphan, was now revered as the savior of the valley, a woman who had looked at a pile of rotted timber and seen the salvation of a people. 19 years old, standing in the biting autumn wind with nothing but a frayed woolen shawl and exactly $5 to her name, Clara Vance had begun her journey as a soul cast out, but through the enduring power of her father's lessons and her own unyielding resilience, she had rewritten the destiny of an entire frontier community. She proved to all who watched her that value is not determined by the judgment of the wealthy or the temporary ruin of an exterior structure, but by the integrity of the foundation and the courage to look where others see only dust and decay. The ruined windmill on the northern ridge no longer groans with the sorrow of abandonment. Its sails spin with a triumphant, steady rhythm against the Wyoming sky, a beacon of hope and a reminder that justice, like water, will always find a way to break through the hardest stone when guided by a righteous hand. We want to thank you for spending your valuable time with us today on the frontier. And if this story touched your heart, we warmly invite you to share it with someone who might need a reminder of their own inner strength. What is a time in your own life when you found profound value or hope in something that others had completely written off as worthless? Until next time, stay close.